All right, so let's begin the show today. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll be focusing on sectors and thematic funds. And for that, I have with me Hemant Rustagi from Wiseinvest. Hemant, good evening and welcome to the show. So, a lot of data indicating investor interest towards a lot of thematic and sectors, especially the ones, which might get a lot of boost after the election results and when the budget comes up, and we might be seeing a new policy framework or certain trust in certain sectors. The kind of data that's showing interest or increasing interest in sector thematic funds, is it one-off because of the election mode that we are into, or we are also looking at a mature investor who feels diversifying towards thematic or sectoral funds is the right way to go going ahead after having the right core portfolio?
Well, Kavita, I think there are different reasons why investors usually invest in sector or thematic fund. I mean, if you look at the current scenario, we've had a good run in the stock market, and typically what happens when the markets are doing well, these funds, these categories of fund, the sector fund, the thematic fund, they tend to do very well. I mean, so have some other segments of the market like mid and small cap. So typically what happens when investors are looking at the past performance or the recent performance, so they look at the fund which are at the top of the chart, and obviously the sector and thematic funds are right up there. Obviously, these sectors that do well will keep on changing depending on where the government is focusing. For example, if you look at currently what we've seen a good run in the defense fund. We look at PSU equity funds, power and infrastructure fund. So I think these are the sectors that the government has been focusing, and I think that's where investors have been putting their money. So yes, I mean there is a particular time in the market when you will see a lot of interest from the investor in these both sector as well as thematic funds.
We've also seen a lot of theme-based NFOs launching, Hemant. We've seen a manufacturing NFO coming. We've also seen defense-related NFOs coming. A lot of sector-specific interest also being seen from the AMC side. The question over here now is, what is the general trend in terms of sector allocation and thematic themes that you are seeing among investors? The ones that are likely to get a boost post-election results, do you think are the ones in concern that we are talking about, even from the investor's point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the key factors when you start looking at sector or thematic fund is not to look at only the past performance. Obviously, you need to see going forward which are the themes, which are the sectors that are likely to do well. As I mentioned earlier, some of these themes or sectors that I mentioned about, that's where the government has been focusing. So I think the key factor is that if we see the same government coming back once the election results are announced, the expectation is that their focus on these sector and themes will continue. So like I mentioned, while past performance you look at, because in the sector and thematic fund, the entry and exit timing is very, very important, right? So you can't be just looking at the past performance. You need to be very clear in terms of what kind of runway these sector or these themes have going forward. Then only you can do it. So I think it's very important for investors to realize that when you're thinking of investing in sector or thematic fund, you need to look at where the growth is going to be. And of course, there are a couple of other factors that investors need to remember. If you are a new investor, if you just started investing, don't just look at the performance, understand the attendant risk of investing in these category of funds. So my recommendation always is that it's only those investors who have experience, who understand equity, who understand what are the risks linked to these kind of funds, only they should be looking at it. And of course, only a small portion of your portfolio should be invested in this. So identifying the sector and thematic themes which are likely to do well, how much proportion of your portfolio should be invested in that, and the manner you invest. So you should be investing in these funds through SIP. Usually, unless and until you expect that the sector or theme that you're choosing has a long runway of growth. Otherwise, like I mentioned, the entry and the exit is very, very important. So if you're going to be doing SIP over the next 1 year, and if this growth phase is going to last for, let's say, a couple of years, you won't even have enough time to allow your money to grow. So I think these are some of the important things that investors should remember while taking a plunge into these funds.
So Hemant, one tricky question or one tricky positioning that investors might want to understand also. We are talking about a concentrated exposure in a particular sector, in a particular theme, right? But the themes and sectors that we are talking about aren't something that investor won't be exposed on, in their other funds. So, for example, we talk about a manufacturing theme. Investors might see these kind of stocks in maybe a large cap or a flexi cap, because fund managers might definitely want to make the most out of these themes which might be running in the future, or at least having a growth perspective. So, how can an investor ensure that the kind of theme or sector you are picking up, and since there is so much of concentration that you are going to have in your portfolio, you have to make sure there is no case of over-diversification of that particular sector in any of the existing categories of funds that you have?
I think this is a very important point, Kavita, that you raise. Yes, I mean, look, if you as an investor are able to spot that there are certain sectors or themes that are likely to do well, and you seem interested in investing in them, there's no reason why a professional fund manager who's backed with a team of researchers will not be aware of it. So yes, absolutely, you're right that many of these diversified funds, whether be it flexi cap fund or large and mid or multi cap, will certainly have exposure if they see a long runway of growth, like I mentioned earlier. And unfortunately, what happens is, as an investor, when you're looking at performance, because these funds have concentrated bet, and if these themes or sectors have been doing well, they will be, like I mentioned earlier, at the top of the chart. So obviously, you get impressed with that, and you feel that I must take exposure in these. In the diversified, even if these sector or themes exist, it won't be visible to you because they may be like holding 5% or 10% or maybe 12, 15% overall in terms of allocation. So many a times the investors can't see how these sectors or themes have contributed to the returns that have been generated by diversified funds. So that's the reason why you see that the sector and thematic fund always, are fancied by investors. But yes, your point is absolutely valid, and I think that is what every investor should do. That once you make up your mind that okay, this is the sector, this is the theme I'm looking at for investing. Apart from certain things that I mentioned earlier, obviously you need to look at what kind of growth it is going to be there, how much exposure you have. One of the important aspects that you need to look at is how much exposure you already have to this sector or a theme that you're looking to invest in. And I think this kind of information is very easy to find. I mean, if you're working with a distributor, or there are many portals that if you put your fund holdings, you can find out as to what kind of sector or stock exposure you have. So it's absolutely important that before you think of investing or you make a decision to invest in these themes or sector, you must analyze the exposure which you already have through the diversified funds.
And also, how can one time their entry and exit in the sector and thematic exposure? Although you might have a time frame which would be more than 3 years, more than 5 years, but you need to first of all pick up a sector that will show or give you growth in terms of return also for that period of time. And then when do you exit it? For example, if there's a particular sector that's buzzing in news for all the wrong reasons, even if you have a longer time horizon, would that be your cue to exit that particular sector at that time?
This can be very tricky. Like I mentioned earlier, when you're investing in sector or thematic fund, the entry and exit timing is very, very important. As an investor, even if you think that you understand the potential the sector or the theme has, and if you feel that there is a long runway of growth over there, there can be many factors that can make a difference. For example, if the government has a certain policy supporting a certain theme or a sector, if there is a change in that, and if you're not someone who's really, keeping track of happenings around those sectors and themes, it can be very, very difficult for you to time your exit. While entry is very easy because you can enter whenever you feel like, right? Because you're in the midst of that growth phase. Exit obviously is equally important. So that's exactly the reason why I said earlier that investors need to be very careful. Unless and until they feel very confident about the fact that they can time it right, the entry and exit. And there are a number of factors, again, depending on, for example, if you talk about a sector, IT sector, for example, they have been feeling for the last few quarters that you are going to see, a rate cut from Fed. Now, obviously, the way the inflation, they're finding it difficult to control. So obviously that is getting postponed, and there are talks of even whether this will happen in the current year or not. So what happens is, if you're taking a bet in the IT sector, you should have the capacity, okay, to hold this investment for a longer period and also go through the periods of underperformance or poor performance or negative performance. So I think it becomes a bit tricky for a common investor to do that. That's exactly the reason why it is always said that if you are looking at a theme or a sector, your fund manager, if the fund has been doing consistently well above the average of the peer group, you will certainly have exposure to that. Don't try to kind of do it yourself, because that can be pretty risky.
All right, so let's give our investors or our viewers some strategy in sector or thematic funds. What's the kind of fund you think they should be picking up, obviously after having the basic core portfolio ready and in place?
I think the current circumstances, assuming that you're going to see the same government after elections, I mean, that's obviously one big thing that we need to keep track of. If that happens, like we mentioned about certain sectoral themes, like defense is definitely there, manufacturing, infrastructure. If you look at the funds per se, I would say Nippon India Infra and Power Fund. In the infrastructure, I would say one can look at Bandhan Infrastructure Fund. And then in the PSU, ABSL PSU fund, then there is frankly India Opportunities Fund. I quite like that fund. I think that has as a broad-based theme of where you're going to see the potential of growth. I think that's something that can be looked at. And then pharma, again, in terms of valuations, in terms of expectation of growth. So ICICI Pru, Pharma, Healthcare and Diagnostic Fund. So these are some of the funds one can look at.
All right, so I think that's almost all the main points that we've discussed as far as investing in sector and thematic funds are concerned. We'll be taking this discussion further ahead, but then it's time for a quick break. Post that, we have our viewers already connected on the phone line. So the discussion on sector and thematic fund continues along with our viewer queries live. See you after this break.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.